we go. Now let's hit record. I've never hit record here before, so here we. I think we're live, Dave.
We're live.
We are live.
Oh,
We
my
are
stars.
live. Here we go. we are so live now. So, everyone, thank you very much, Dave, for joining me this morning on Just Ask. We are so excited to have you in guest number one.
Oh, Ben,
So
it's such a pleasure to be here.
I'd love to be able to say that there was no technical difficulties, but you know what? We persevered, and here
That
we
is part
are.
of becoming a good host, is persevering through technical difficulties. Oh, lesson number one, young Padawan.
So Dave, TV host, radio host, public speaker in both the community and church as well, and also a superhero out in the community too, spreading your message of kindness. So a lot of what you do involves speaking well and very
Yes, yeah.
fluently. So I'm really happy to have you on as guest number one. And I just want to kind of dive in right in. I mean, and we're both hosts on Rogers TV. So we both have weekly hosts or weekly shows. And we have a wide array of guests that come on and join us in studio. And that's, I think, really how you and I met, was just kind of, I guess we had crossed paths before that, but then it just, all of a sudden our paths kind of crossed more frequently.
We wound up in the TV studio. I was finishing up and you were starting, and it was neat to me to watch you begin your journey on how do you host a show, because there's still magic to television. I mean, no matter how we're broadcasting a podcast on a squad cast, but there is still a magic to when you're broadcasting something that I still find it's true, and there's something neat about television. And so I've been interested watching you develop as a host, so this is a neat discussion.
Awesome, cool. I'm happy to have you here. So, why don't we go way back? Do you remember the first time that you had to perform or to speak in public? And what was that like for you?
My mom tells a story about when I was a kid. We were in the Linden Park Mall in Brantford, Ontario, and we were walking up to Sears, and I stopped and I looked at the sign and I said, SEARS, Sears. And it was like how she said, it was like you were doing an ad. And she goes, Dave, you were born with a microphone in your mouth. And as long back as I can remember, I mean, when I was a kid, I would have little Fisher-Price tape recorders, and I would pretend to call Blue Jays games. I would pretend to be Tom Cheek and Jerry Howarth, and Jerry was one of my first boys. Ha ha! There she goes. And I would call Blue Jays games. I would watch the TV on mute, and I would pretend to be the radio broadcaster and then listen to my broadcast back. In retrospect, they probably weren't very good, but that's where my mind went to, and I would listen to radio broadcasts of baseball games late at night, and the guys who were the DJs on the radio. I used to just be fascinated by them. And I mean, I remember they don't do them anymore, but mid-elementary school, you started to, back in the day, you had to do speeches, and it was part of your annual curriculum for English. And I remember watching friend after friend be petrified of going up and doing speeches, and I'm like, this is the only thing I'm good at.
This is me.
This is me. I remember doing a speech about there was one girl in my class who had immigrated from Vietnam, and she told this incredible story of their family coming across from Vietnam, and it was touching, but she didn't communicate it well. And I did a speech about my dog, who was just a dumb dog, and I ended up winning the speech competition because I could tell the story better. Like, this dog is not even remotely as interesting as this harrowing story of immigration, but it's how you tell it. And I, for whatever reason, I was always able to tell a good story, and that's a big part of broadcasting and public speaking, is telling a story and helping others tell their story.
Right, it is. It's a huge part of it, and you touched on it there. Speaking about your classmates' nerves during those speeches. Is nerves something, I know that when all of a sudden the countdown goes on for the show, I still get those jitters. It's like pregame jitters. It's not like stressed out nerves anymore. Like, oh man, I'm just about to go on TV. It's more like you're kind of excited. You're ready to go. You want to make sure that you perform well. Do you still get those nervous jitters,
I've never
or have
had
you
them.
ever had them? You've
I've,
never had them.
it's not true. The only public speaking I've ever done where I have had them and I still get them is when I've done stand up comedy. Now I've only ever done it 5 or 6 times, but it's like you are in a boxing match with the audience, like, and because when you're funny and you do anything else, it's like, oh well, I'm interested in what you're saying, but oh, and he's funny, so it's like an extra little bonus prize that you find in your box of
Right.
shreddies. But when you're doing comedy, it's like they look at you going, all right, funny boy, come on, get me, and that is the most intimidating. But the rest of it honestly has never been there. Sometimes in advance a little bit, but
Right.
maybe a day out where I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to go and do this. And but when you're there, when I get on stage, it's just like I feel like a duck in water, right? Like,
You're just
and
comfortable.
I've talked with many people, in fact, even just different folks that even put on shows that they watch. There are some people that do get very nervous right before, to the point of, and again, this is actually another stand-up comedy reference. A friend of mine who puts on a lot of comedy shows. He said, it's talked to me once about finding it interesting how people dealt with before the camera goes on or the lights go on or you walk out on stage. He said there are some people that pace around, even throw up in the back, but then they call their name and they come out, or the light goes on, and
Boom.
it's like nothing is wrong. People with deep seated anxiety disorders, they're out on stage, like fear of people, but they're on stage and they're just on fire, and then they come
Right.
off and they can't even look you in the eye. Like
Yeah.
I've seen performers that we put on shows, same thing as far as musicians. They're on stage and they're just at home, and then they shuffle off and they can't look you in the eye and can't interact like a normal human chit chat afterwards.
Right.
And it's so, I don't know what the psychology is behind all of it, but I know that for whatever reason, it's not an intimidating thing to me. Although for the honest to goodness most intimidating thing sometimes, and it was when I was younger, was that I dealt with a really serious stutter when I was young,
Right.
and I still do. If you really listen to it, I still do deal with a stutter. But there were times when I was growing up and learning to speak where I would open my mouth to say something and I couldn't get words out.
Hmm.
And it still happens sometimes, and I have to change the first word that I'm about to say because I can't get that word out, and I know it, and so I have to go about it a different way to be able to get words out of my mouth.
Right.
So it's interesting that I've chosen different things in life where public speaking is such a part of it, but I also know I'm not the only one. So guys like James Earl Jones, who became one of the most recognizable voices in broadcasting, when
Hmm.
he was young, couldn't get words out of his mouth, and the only place where he could was with his cows in his barn when he was a kid. And he could speak fluently because all of a sudden there was no pressure on, but he learned tricks to be able to allow him to present like he has. So
That's incredible. I had never heard that story about him before.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting thing, and as I've met different stutterers over the years and people that have dealt with it to different levels, it's also not uncommon, and so you just learn how to be able to um, trick your brain into being
Hmm.
able to get to the point where you then start going and words
Right.
start coming out of your mouth. So
Awesome. Awesome. And we kind of touched on it a little bit there about people like doing the pacing, a bit of anxiety before. Do you have any like pre-show rituals or pre-performance rituals?
it all depends on what I'm doing, right? Like I don't have any
Hmm.
pre-show, pre-performance. I'm like, so if I'm hosting Brant Life, I've got a guest
Right.
that's there, and honestly, you have to get used to hearing a couple of different things going on in your mind and in your ear, and being able to do both of them. So
Right.
when you're in a television scenario, your director is in your ear counting you down from 10, and I have a guest that part of my job is to also make this guest have a great experience. So
Right.
I'm attempting to still have chit chat. Sometimes I've got chit chat going on with a guest about what they've eaten for lunch at the same time as the director is going in 10, 9, and I'm trying. Okay, I'm thinking I got to wrap this conversation up and go. Ha ha ha! That was really. I love spinach too. In 3 seconds. Okay, and now we're on. So it all depends because your guest is a different is different each time. They have different levels of nerves. Being able to keep your guests in a comfortable place, so when the light goes on, they're ready to go. Is That's a variable. So there's different
Right.
ways to even approach these things. If you're interviewing for the edit or you're interviewing live. If you're
Hmm.
interviewing live, it's a different story. If you're interviewing and you know you can edit in a subsequent time, then there's all kinds of different ways to be able to make your guest feel more comfortable, so that you can, because
Hmm.
you always have to have the end goal of what you're doing in mind. So
Right.
you have to be thinking about the macro. You have to be thinking about, what do I want to come out of this event, out of this broadcast? What
Hmm.
do I need to do in the next 5 minutes to be able to get what I need out of it? Sometimes, if you're editing for, or if you're interviewing for a smaller piece, you only really need one line, and so you can talk a whole lot of gobbledygook. You can ask the
Hmm.
same question 15 times until you get an answer that you want. It doesn't really matter. But if
Right.
you're doing something live, that first blast really matters, right? So it's always dependent to me, Ben, on what I'm doing it for.
Right. And I find like that balancing act as a host, and having like just so many different I guess stimulations. You've got the guest sitting there, like you said, you've got the director in your ear, then you're trying to ask questions. You ask a question and then you listen to their answer, and then you have to be ready to either play off of that answer and work for that, or you and then also if you end up with a guest that maybe doesn't, it's like, especially early on in an episode and it's their first time, they might just be like yes. Like you got to be very careful asking the right questions, because if you get a yes answer, then you can't really play off of that in any way. You have to have another question prepared.
Yes, yes, you do. Like so, so a couple of different aspects of this. There are some hosts who make a very big deal about the fact that they don't want to talk to their guests before shows go
Hmm.
on. So a lot of the late night guys used to be like that. I'm pretty sure Carson was like that, where they never talked to the guests before they went on, because they knew where they wanted to go, and he knew if he launched into it, he didn't want to ruin his material or the direction before, because he wanted the reaction to be live. So there's
Right.
even hosts on local Rogers cable that function the same way. If you go on their show, they're not talking to you before, and you're like, what's the deal with this guy? But the
Yeah.
reason is they want to be able to save it for the camera, because that first honest reaction is a whole lot better than, we were talking in the green room, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
if you're referring to a conversation that happened another time, all of a sudden you're cutting your audience out of it. But if you're a skilled host, you should be able to do both. You should be able to keep that wall when your guest is there. To be able to go, I want to build a rapport, because I think rapport is extraordinarily important. So
Hmm.
when my guests come for whatever show, I know that I have to play host a little bit and keep it light, but build some rapport, because I want the feel for when the tally light goes on, that the audience feels like me and the guest are old friends, even if we've
Right.
never met each other before. And you can fake it, but it's better if you have some kind of rapport going on. And so I think, for me, guest interaction and people interaction is important before. And the only way you get around the, how can I deal with a couple things happening at the same time, is practice. Like,
Right.
it's there is the amount of times you do it, you start to get used to it. Like there's no shortcut around it. I don't think, and I'm sure some people are better suited than others, but it's just practice. So I went to broadcast school at Niagara College, and they made us do intros and extras a million times, and we were like, this is absolutely ridiculous. But you just simply get used to doing it. Like I remember, and how to, when something happens behind the camera and you're the host and you're trying to figure out how to react to it, you it's a practiced skill. Like I
Hmm.
remember being in broadcast school, we were doing a television show, like a weekly regional TV show in out of Welland, and there was a story that the news anchor was reading, and it was about the families of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, who were the victims of the Paul Bernardo crimes years ago, and they're from
Right.
I think the Mahaffey family or French family is from St. Catharines in I think the Mahaffey family, but they're from the broadcast region. Well, being young dumb college students, the one of my peers was the floor director, and he was having a weird day, and he's throwing his headphones up in the air while the news anchor is trying to read this story on horrific crimes, but the floor director's not paying attention, and he drops his headphones, being a goofball, and the anchor starts to laugh at the nitwit behind the camera, and all of a sudden it looks like he's laughing at this terrible
That's what's
crime.
just happened. Yeah.
And I remember I was the host of the show, and I watched our program director bolt down from the studio, pull the plug, and rightfully ream out these two guys. But the only thing the audience saw was the host giggling.
Right.
And they don't know any of the rest of that stuff. It doesn't matter to them, the rest of that stuff. It's the face and the voice that they go, that guy laughed, and he is. And that's a responsibility on the host to be able to do this enough, to learn enough, to be able to go, I know that I have a responsibility to the audience, to be able to, regardless of what happens, still be there for them, be their happy TV friend,
Right.
And so there's no shortcuts around just simply practice doing it.
Yeah, and it really that practice also plays on authenticity too. Like I know when we've both traded places on each other's shows, and just feeling like I know we've had that time to build up that rapport. But just sitting there, I feel very comfortable working with you and sitting down with you, and that having that authentic conversation with your guests before to kind of build up that rapport is so powerful. And every now and again, there are those little glitches, like especially as a live show too. It's like, okay, and we're all of a sudden we're having a conversation in the commercial break. We're having a conversation, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you're back, and all of a sudden you have to turn and just stare, and it's like, welcome back, and you kind of make a bit of a joke about it, right? There's nothing else that you can do. You just have to play it off as fun. And I really like though that kind of almost get a feel for what's going on. Like it really shows that the studio is a fun place to be and a comfortable place to be for our guests when we bring them on.
That's true. But people on the other side couldn't give as they used to say in the 40s, whooping funt about any technical anything. They honestly couldn't. They don't care about the camera. They don't care about the tech part of it. Like they don't. They're tuning in for the content and the people. So there are times when technical things happen that it's worth acknowledging, and times that it's not. If it's really evident, it's not an awful thing to acknowledge something that's going on around you. But for the most part, like you can I've seen where I've seen issues is when hosts go off the rails talking about tech stuff. Now it can be taken to the other extreme. I remember there was an old blooper from the 70s. It was a religious TV show where a lady, she was like, and the Lord said, she was real focused on the camera, and in the background this like an old studio light smashed behind her, and her set caught on fire, and literally it was in flames, and she's like, and the devil is trying to distract us, but and I'm like, lady, you need to get out of that studio. Like, acknowledge the burning set. I don't care what a guy in broadcast school told you, that thing's on fire, get out.
That's a whole different level of perseverance.
Yes, but the audience doesn't care about the technical issues.
Right.
Being able to quickly laugh things off and find a way just to simply continue, it's disarming to the audience. It's disarming to the guests who are also not used to technical issues, and they feel as befuddled as you're there to be that calming influence to go, hey, listen, everything's gonna be all right. I'm Ben Strasser, and you're gonna be okay.
And I mean, you can't really, those are things that you can't really prepare for. when you're going through these things. You can't like all those are
Yeah.
external circumstances. How about like do you do much preparation for your shows or for public speaking engagements that you do? Because I know
Um,
some people like to dive like right in and they want to know absolutely everything that they could possibly know about that person, and then that almost really super curates the interview instead of like being almost like a discovery project. Like I think
mhm.
there's a happy medium.
Well, I think it's both. I think I like to know who it is I'm interviewing. I
Hmm.
like to know a little bit about the organization. Again, it all depends on what you're doing. If you've got an hour long in depth, you're going to need a heck of a lot more prep than you are for 5 minutes of, hey, tell me about Pumpkin Fest. You know,
Right.
like it's, but I like to know the background of who I'm talking to. But I also look at the show that I'm doing and I think, what do I want to accomplish with this? So for something like Brant Life,
Hmm.
I often have people come and really all they want to talk about is Pumpkin Fest. But I start asking them questions about, well, why do you like pumpkins so darn much? Like, and I
Right.
like to find out the reasons behind the things that people do. And so you need to be able
Hmm.
to know what the externals are, the researchables are, but
Right.
then that's just a framework for a dialogue. So if you're going in totally cold and you don't know much about the person or the organization, you can kind of look like a country bumpkin a little bit, going, "Well, who are you? And tell me about your what is the trick?" I don't know what country
Yeah.
bumpkins do. And
Yeah.
the analogy didn't work, but I was looking for an excuse to use that voice.
Right.
But I
You got a list there of different voices you want to use
no,
just
but
off camera
imagine if I
now?
did. I don't
Yeah,
know. It's a
that'd be
weird
that'd be
project and
amazing.
joke. I was every day I work at anyway. That would be funny. Maybe
Yeah.
for another podcast. But you do need to listen to what people are saying, and then when there's something of interest, jump off of it. Know where you've
Right.
got to get to. Like that's to me a big issue is that you got to know your big picture. You got to know your framework, because if you've got an 8 minute interview, that's what my Brant Life segments are.
Right.
If that guest is only going to feel good about themselves if they've talked about that event to a full extent, it doesn't mean with 3 minutes to go, I go, tell me about your father,
Right.
like,
Right.
because that is a rabbit trail you can't get back from. So if you've got the time to go down a trail and you know that, and you just realize, hey, there's something good in what that guy just said, tell me more about that, I'd love to
Right.
know more, then you can do that. But you have to be able to bring it back to be able to bring a resolution. So I often think of it as a like an Inception type thing, right? Remember the movie
Right.
Inception where they go
Yeah.
down a level and a level. It only works if you can get back to that reality. If you need to be able to bring it back to a natural resolution, so you can't dive too far down in it unless you can bring it back to that natural resolution. But I when I'm in the middle of it, each interview is like a little challenge, right? So I'm
Right.
constantly thinking about the time, what I can do, where I can go. Do I have the time to unravel and bring it back? I think about how deep you can go before I can bring it back to the top, and so it's fun. It's a neat challenge.
Yeah. What do you like with all everything that you do, your public speaking? What do you hope to achieve through sharing your message and through your performances?
For me, everything I do is about community transformation.
Right.
So I think it's probably be a different answer than many, but um, I realized when I was young that I could communicate lots of different things, and I could
Hmm.
use this to, like, for years. My goal was to be David Letterman. Like, I
Right.
want to be Johnny Carson. I want to be David Letterman. That was the goal. I went to broadcast school and I thought, I actually really could do very well at this if I just simply put this into my profession. I could probably
Right.
be a successful newscaster or host, or I could be Ben Mulrooney today,
Yeah.
But for me, I went to a what's a bigger purpose? What
Hmm.
what do I want to use the skill that I have to achieve? So I only do things where I look and go, at the end of it, this does point our community towards being a better community. This
Right.
allows people to have their story told who need their story told, so that they both feel good about themselves, but also the community becomes a better place. So I'm not doing a lot of things that are just I'm just doing it for my own personal amusement. I miss my own personal amusement sometimes, but in the middle of I find a lot of fun in doing public speaking, but I realized that it was worth more to me when it was worth more to the community at large, and so that's my goal for all of it. So I don't need to make. Have you ever seen somebody in the middle of an interview go, should I ask this question or not? Should I ask it? This person will never speak to me again, but the public deserves to know, but this person's life will be destroyed if I ask this question. There used to be sportscasters that I would watch that would go, at the end I would go, you're a jerk for asking that question. Yeah. You didn't have to ask that. And then they go on rambles about journalistic integrity and a bunch of things that they didn't have in the first place. I'm never going to be that guy. I'm never going to use this for that, because it actually is just simply a destructive thing. For me, I want to be able to find ways for people to be able to tell the things that are actually inside of them. I want to go and speak at things that I can encourage people to be better in themselves and be better people, but also for them to be able to see their community in a better light. So that's my common thread, and it doesn't seem like that would affect the practice of interviewing, but it really honestly does. If I have a guest leave and go, you should never have asked me that, that was just inappropriate, and you made me embarrassed because of this for your own purposes, so that you could get a laugh, or that you could get a clip, or that you could, then I haven't achieved what my macro goal is. There could be lots of people that go, that is their goal, that's their professional goal, have at her. That's not where I'm headed. But I think that as interviewers and as aspiring broadcasters and interviewers, you need to know personally why you're doing what you're doing, and your interview style and where you go actually needs to be tailored to your own personal vision for what you're doing this for.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me on episode number 1 of Just Ask. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate you offering your advice and tips on how to interview properly, and all of the knowledge and experience that you've gathered over your career. So thank you very much. And with that,
Ben, it was a pleasure. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it was. Did you feel very comfortable?
I felt so comfortable you wouldn't believe it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I am in the lap of comfort right here. Allow me to enjoy a quick beverage of water.
Ooh, very nice. Very nice. And with that, we are going to wrap up this show, number 1, and we will see you with the next one. Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.